Good evening? Better? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here with me tonight, and I just really appreciate the invitation from Chancellor Limcool to be here. And I got a great tour of UMR just before we had dinner, and it's a wonderful campus, and learned a lot about how they operate from an educational model. So it's been a great visit already, and I haven't even had a chance to chat with you all. So I appreciate you taking the time to be here. So they asked me to talk just a little bit tonight about women in sports. So we're going to touch on Title IX law and why playing sports at the youth level, at the high school level, and at the college level is important. Beyond that, it's just fun and we're passionate about it, but what does it really mean for the future of these young women that get to play? I thought I'd start off with just a little bit of my background and why I'm so passionate about sports and women in sports. So I grew up in a family that just loved everything about sports. My parents had season tickets to the Arizona Cardinals that used to be the St. Louis Cardinals football program. I don't have one childhood memory without the sound of Jack Buck calling the baseball game in the background. It's a way of life in that town. I like to tell the story that I think my first week at Minnesota, they brought me over to a meeting over at the Twins, and Dave St. Peter stopped me right in front of the championship that St. Louis lost to the Twins back in the late 80s. So I have quickly realized where my loyalty lies now. But really just was always really encouraged to play sports. My mom played basketball in college back when they played half-court basketball. I thought half court meant that you checked the ball at half and just played on one basket. It really wasn't until about 5 years ago I brought her to a WNBA game when I was living in Indiana. We watched the Fever play, and she was sort of talking me through what that meant. What it really meant was they couldn't cross the midpoint line. You played it, so you know what that's all about. So, I was so fortunate that it just never occurred to me that people didn't have the opportunity to play, because that was never something that I had to face. But I played every sport that I could get my hands on. My parents spent endless hours with me and my sisters out in the backyard. I broke a lot of windows, I can tell you, whether that was a pitch that missed the target, or I thought it was really good to kick the soccer ball off the neighbor's wall, which didn't always end so well. But I had a great opportunity to really engage in sport, and it's really where I got my confidence. So I was a quiet kid in school, never wanted to draw any attention. I never actually only missed one day of school my entire elementary and high school year. So I was always the kid in the background. But when I was on that field, I always felt like I could do something that was a little bit different. And so I played softball and basketball and certainly soccer through high school. And I didn't always have success, and I think that's one of the key pieces that I think is really important, is that I wasn't always the best athlete, never was the best athlete in any sport. So I learned just as much from my failures as I did from my successes. My softball coach in high school gave me the nickname, which wasn't all that creative, but he called me BG, which is my initials, right? And he would call me that when somebody hit a foul ball, and he'd say, BG, and I'd say, I'm on that, coach. So I got to go chase the foul balls because I really wasn't good enough to be the one called into the batting box. But from that, you learned how to be a great team player, because my role wasn't to be on the field. But eventually I did find my niche, and soccer was it. So I was fortunate enough to earn a scholarship. I played at a 2-year private school in North Carolina called Brevard, and then had the opportunity to play Division I soccer at Clemson University in South Carolina. I had a tremendous experience, certainly by what happened on the field, but more importantly, how it helped me really develop and enhance my academic experience while I was there. Never occurred to me to work in sports. So I say about 20 plus years out of college. Never occurred to me that I was going to have a career in sports. But my college coaches kept pushing me to try it out. They said, you're going to graduate school anyway. You might as well see if you can test your hand at coaching. And so I did. My first interview went a little bit like this. So I heard you played for Tracy Bates, who won an Olympic gold medal and 4 national championships at North Carolina? And I said, I did. And the head coach at the University of Missouri St. Louis said, well, what size shoe do you wear? And that's how I got my first job. So sometimes it's because you have champions that push you to be in the right place at the right time, and that was certainly my good fortune to start off my coaching career. So I coached for about 11 years. Also had some administrative duties there as well, and which often happens at smaller schools. And then got really intrigued with the bigger picture, with the sort of the business of college athletics, and could I impact more athletes than I could just as a coach. And I miss coaching every single day. You certainly miss the relationship that you have with the student athletes that you build over a longer period of time than you do in administration. I miss wearing tennis shoes every single day, too. I had to trade those in when I took the administrative role. But had a great opportunity to go to Butler University in Indianapolis, where I was for about 5 years. Had a great experience there. Had the opportunity to work for just an incredible athletic director in Barry Collier. He really started what's now known as the Butler Way, and really said, hey, you can be successful by doing things the right way for the right reasons. And then my path led me to what I like to call home. A few generations back, but my great-grandparents actually settled in Henderson, Minnesota. So my mom spent her summers here vacationing, and we'd been back a couple times as a kid, but our family name is still on a local drugstore we own there, and lines the stained glass windows of the church. So one of those strange familiarities when I got to come back to Minnesota, and I've enjoyed the opportunity to be here for the last 3 years. So it's been an incredible journey, but really all made possible because of Title IX. I'm certainly a product of Title IX, and that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight. When I came out of high school, there were about 300 soccer programs in all of the NCAA, so Division I, Division II, and Division III. Now there are over 950 women's soccer programs across the country. So because of that growth, I was able to have the opportunity to play at the college level. And also it gave me access to education. So scholarship allowed me the opportunity to pursue my degree and to pursue my education. So it really has been a personal journey for me. And one that I had to learn to appreciate. I didn't grow up at a time where I didn't know I couldn't participate on a team, but I now truly appreciate those that were passionate enough to help push and make sure that opportunity was going to exist down the road. So Title IX, as most people know, was passed in 1972, and I'm going to get into the weeds just a little bit here because I think it's important to understand what the law means and how it actually impacts our young women each and every day. But it was enacted in 1972, and it's still what I would say is a work in progress. Historically speaking, it was a landmark catalyst for change, and there's no doubt that we have seen that over the years. But we're still learning how to practically apply that. What does that mean? What does it look like? How are we going to make that work in our high schools and youth sports and at the college level when we now have a system that is built on big business, and it looks a little bit different than it did in 1972. So we just celebrated the 40-year anniversary of Title IX, and we've come a long way, but we certainly need to make sure that we continue to make sure that those opportunities are going to exist for our young women in sports. A few points of clarification before I go any further. First of all, Title IX protects only student athletes, not coaches or administrators. So once in a while you may hear of some sort of lawsuit, but if it's about a staff member or a coach, that's going to fall under employment law, and it's not going to be covered by Title IX. So Title IX only protects the participants. Office of Civil Rights is the enforcement agency within the Department of Education that's going to investigate and review compliance with Title IX law. Title IX applies to all levels of education. So any institution, so this could be elementary, high school, or college that receives federal funds. It doesn't mean federal funds that are paying directly for athletics, but it may mean Pell Grants. So even though Pell Grants may not necessarily go towards athletics or to any athlete, but if an institution takes any sort of money from the federal government, then they are expected to comply with Title IX law. The other myth that I just wanted to touch on, because this is something that comes up quite a bit, is that Title IX has led to a decrease in men's sports. And just from the college level, I just want to throw out some numbers. So since Title IX was enacted, there has been a growth actually overall in the number of teams across college for men's sports of about 1,000. Now, we've seen some sports dropped and some added, but it really is more about what actually is the area of interest. So we've seen hockey grow. We now have seen the growth of lacrosse across the country, and maybe some other sports have been dropped, but overall there's still a net positive on the men's side. That growth on the women's side has been even greater, closer to about 3,000 teams that have been added overall since Title IX was enacted, and of course they had a little bit farther to go, so that was certainly a piece of that. As Title IX is applied to college athletics, there's really three components to that: participation, financial aid, and benefits and opportunities. There's really two basic provisions. So one is, how do I get to a place where I can play? And the second is, how are you going to treat me when I get there? So we talk a lot about participation and what that means. So do I have access to participate in sports? Is there a team for me to play on and a place for me to go? And then once I'm there, do I have a field that I can play on? Do I get a scholarship? Do I have a uniform to wear? Those different types of things. Participation has a component that is measured at the college level, and there's a three-part test to determine if you're in compliance with the law. And that three-part test is a little bit complex, but they refer to something in prong one that's called substantial proportionality. And I'm going to come back to that one in a minute. Number two is a history or continuing practice or program expansion. So if you want to say at the University of Minnesota that you comply with the participation requirements, you can choose one of these areas to demonstrate your compliance. And if you want to choose history, you have to be able to say you've added participation opportunities or a sport probably equal to about 25% of your overall student-athlete makeup within the last 5 years. Now, Minnesota hasn't added any sports in the last 5 years, so if we wanted to use that prong, that probably wouldn't be effective for us. Prong 3 means your current program fully accommodates the interests and abilities of all of your students. So how do you do that? You'd have to make sure that any student that is currently at the university or any student that might come has the opportunity to play any sport that they have interest for, have the ability to play, and also have teams they can compete against. So for example, we don't have sand volleyball at the University of Minnesota. Now one would say maybe we have interest in sand volleyball because we have court volleyball players that would probably love to play on the sand, right? But we would also be able to, before we could say we had to add that, you'd have to say, do you have the ability? I think knowing our volleyball program, we can pretty easily say we'd have ability, right? But the third component to that is, do you have people to play in your region, in your normal competitive region? So you could look around and say, hey, typically in our Big Ten type footprint, do we have enough teams to play against in sand volleyball? That doesn't mean we can't choose to add it, but we probably wouldn't be required to add it if you didn't have teams to play in your competitive region. So to jump back to substantial proportionality, and this is what the University of Minnesota and most Division I and Division II institutions use to prove compliance. And this is how we look at how many participation opportunities we need to provide to our men and women on our campuses. Now, when I say participation opportunities, the key component to that is which sports they compete in. So one individual can count multiple times. So if you have a male student athlete who's playing football and running track, when you're talking participation, they count twice. If you have a female student athlete that's running cross country and also running outdoor track, they're going to count twice. So in terms of participation, we actually talk about which teams are they representing themselves. So the law says that in order to be in compliance with proportionality, that you must offer opportunities to play sports in the same percentage as your undergraduation population. So if you have 50% of your undergraduate student body, regardless of their participation in athletics, is 50% male and 50% female, then you must offer 50% of your athletic opportunities to men and 50% of your athletic opportunities to women. Make sense? So most college campuses, although Minnesota is not most college campuses, typically have a higher percentage of women, female undergrads. So if you had 60% of your undergrad population that was female, then you would need to offer 60% of your participation opportunities to women. Financial aid, and this is probably one of the most important components under Title IX law because scholarship can provide access to education. So what the scholarship requirements are is that you must award scholarships if you're an institution that offers them at all, which we certainly do at Minnesota. But if you offer scholarships at all, you must offer those in proportion to their participation rates. So now you're only looking at athletes. So if we have 50% of our student athletes are men and 50% are women, you're only counting them once this time because you can't get two different scholarships, right? So this is what we call our unduplicated number. So 50% of your scholarship dollars have to go to men and 50% have to go to women. And that's how you'd be in compliance with financial aid. And then you have your third area, which is benefits and treatment. And this is really everything else. It's what they used to call the laundry list. So you can see it has equipment and supplies, scheduling, travel, tutors, coaches, medical and training, housing, publicity, recruitment, and support services. All of those different areas must be provided equally to your male and to your female teams. So I was at the women's basketball banquet last night, and we have a few others in the room that were attending that as well. And I sat next to this woman, and she told me that she played softball in the 70s in high school growing up in Omaha, Nebraska. And she said they had one set of uniforms that they shared between the softball, volleyball, and basketball teams. So then they had to wait until one season was over before they could really start the next one because they didn't have a uniform to wear. Now, of course, I asked if that was true for her male counterparts, and she said, well, at that time, they each had their own uniform. And by today's standards, and since the enactment of Title IX, that certainly wouldn't be permissible. Now, hopefully, stories like that are a thing of the past, but we still have to really look at what might be offered. So it's not just that you both have uniforms, but what's the quality of the uniforms? How many uniforms do you get? How often do you replace those? And so there's a lot of different areas that you have to look at. Travel's another really good example to look at in terms of are your benefits and the way that you're providing support to your student athletes equal. So if your men's program is permitted to travel all over the country for competition, but you tell your women's program that they need to stay in your region, that would be a concern. By the same token, maybe both teams get to travel anywhere they want, but you have a men's program that gets to travel by plane, and the women's program has to travel by bus or by van. Also would be a concern. So these 11 areas are what you have to make sure that you are providing equitably to all of your men's and women's programs across the board. So that's a little bit about the law, and I think it's important to understand how that's applied because it really did change the landscape of women in sports across the country, at the youth level, at the high school level, and certainly at the college level as well. We know that in 1972, 7% of high school student athletes were female. Now that number is up above 40%. So you can see the impact it's had on those opportunities. We get to celebrate young athletes. Monet Davis, I don't know if you remember her from about a year ago. She was pitching in the Little League World Series. We get to celebrate our college athletes like Rachel Banham and a local favorite, Carly Wagner, and all the success that duo has had at the University of Minnesota over the last year. We had a tremendous summer in my favorite sport, which was soccer, as the women's United States women's national team won the World Cup and really captured the attention of the country for a few weeks. And then Minnesota's own, of course, Minnesota Link, Lindsay Whalen. So all of those women had an opportunity to participate either now or as young athletes because this law was put in place. I want to show you one of my all-time favorite TV commercials. It is, I believe, 22 years old, and the reason I can remember that is because I wrote a paper on it in grad school. But this is called If You Let Me Play Sports, and it was a Nike ad that was done back in 1995.
Let me play sports. I would like myself more. I'll have more self-confidence if you let me play sports. If you let me play. If you let me play, I'll be 60% less likely to get breast cancer. I will suffer less depression.
If you let me play sports.
I will be more likely to leave a man with pizza.
I'll be less likely to get pregnant before I want to.
I will learn what it means to be strong.
To be strong.
Let me play sports.
If you let me play sports.
What do you think? It used to be anecdotal about the impact that sports had on young girls, and then they started to do some research that really showed what those benefits might be. And all of those things are certainly true, I believe, for young men and young women, but they were really important for young women as they were growing up. So 68% of girls now participate in youth sports. So that's really what we're talking about under the age of 13. About 81% of 3rd to 5th grade girls in suburban areas are playing sports. And the variations that we see now in the gender gap are really driven by the economic disparities by race, ethnicity, and family characteristics. But the opportunities have grown, and the impact is really can really be felt for a lifetime. Sports are a health and educational asset for girls and boys, particularly here in the United States. Organized sports are associated with children's general health, body, esteem, healthy weight, popularity, quality of life, and educational achievement. Female athletes often derive these benefits even at a higher rate than their male peers. Their participation in organized or team sports helps enhance their overall quality of life. And I think those are characteristics that we're all aware of, but really understanding the importance of keeping them engaged. Not that they have to play throughout college, but you want to give them that experience while you can. It's a particular concern right now because 70% of children in the United States are dropping out of sports before the age of 13. So they're getting into sports and they're dropping out. Anybody have any idea why? Money. That's a really good component, a piece of it. The club sports realm has gotten so expensive. So part of it is access, but part of it is the ability to participate. What's the other thing that young girls and boys don't get to do today that I talked about doing as a young kid? How many sports do you get to play? Right? Now, we want them to decide by the time they're 10 or 11 if they're going to be the next Amanda Kessel on the ice, right? So we make them choose so early, and they are practicing in an organized fashion for so long that oftentimes they get burnt out or their families can't afford to continue. So that's certainly a concern, and that's happening for our men and for our women, but it's particularly alarming for girls because if they stay in sport, they're more likely to graduate from college, find a job, be employed in a typically male industry. So the list of things that it can contribute to if they stay in for a little bit longer period of time is really, really long. This slide just shows a little bit of what sports adolescents are now interested in. And I know it's a little bit hard to read, but you can see the boys are playing football, basketball, baseball, soccer, track, and these are nationwide statistics. Women, the highest rate of participation is still for basketball. Throughout the country, volleyball, softball, soccer, track, swimming, etc. Here in Minnesota, we continue to see increases in participation in high school sport for women. Over the past 5 years, that number has continued to grow. Most popular sports in the state of Minnesota for our young girls, volleyball is number 1, track number 2, softball 3, basketball 4, and ice hockey is 5. So we continue to see that. Fastest growing sport in the state of Minnesota, any guesses? Lacrosse. Yes, lacrosse continues to be the fastest growing sport on both the men's and the women's side. Transitioning back to college sports just a little bit, we know athletics at the college level is just one small component of the higher education experience at many institutions. It's often referred to as an extracurricular activity, but I would actually argue it's a co-curricular activity that enhances the learning experience of its participants. They really are, being a student athlete is really a living laboratory for leadership. What they learn each and every day can contribute to their future success in their career and their ability to be leaders in their community. Again, I think that translates across genders, but it's even more true for our young women. At Minnesota and at most institutions across the country, we really talk a lot about our commitment to our 725 student athletes that 4 years is really going to be about the next 40 years of their life. It's not just about the experience they have with us. It's about what that's going to mean for what happens after they graduate. It's certainly unique. Your experience as a student athlete, you're balancing practice and training, class, academics, studies. You have to learn how to prepare for competition, and on top of that, we have other expectations such as community service and leadership requirements. All of those things equip them with those transferable skills that are going to need to be successful in their career of choice. A really great example of this, we've had a couple recent grads that have been developing as they're there and really transitioned very well into the professional world. On the women's side, Ali Buska, who was a recent graduate of our women's golf team, she spent her summers when she wasn't golfing doing internships at Land O'Lakes, and then was hired by Ernst & Young along with 3 of her teammates. They all 3 had job offers before they graduated. And Ernst & Young is of particular interest because I want to share with you this recent research study. It came out about a year ago, and it was a collaboration between EY and ESPNW. And what they did was they surveyed 400 executive women across 4 continents. And this really what it did was just confirm what we all believe to be anecdotally true. 94% of executive women played sports. 50% were played at the college level or higher. So 94% of our executive women. So those are women that are going to land in the C-suite of whatever industry that they're in. And half of those played sport at the college level. So if we track back to the earlier statistics and we say we have 40% of our young women that are playing sport and youth here in the state of Minnesota, now we know that of that 40%, 94% have an opportunity to be execs, and 50% of those played at the college level. So the impact that it has really is translating into future success. The vice chair of public policy at EY Sports was a basketball scholarship recipient. In the article, she says, sport teaches intangible leadership skills that cannot be taught in the classroom. The top 3 leadership skills that they found were the ability to see projects through to completion, motivational skills, and team building. The other one that wasn't outlined but they talk a lot about in the article is resilience. So it's the ability to fail and get back up. The ability to fail and find another way to try and be successful. And certainly in athletics, you fail much more often than you are successful. Not many of our softball players who are having a great season so far have batting averages above a 500. So if you're failing over half the time, and really if you've got a batting average of about 300, that's pretty good, right? So you only have to be successful a third of the time. Does that translate into the business world? Can you be successful a third of the time and keep your job? Probably not. But as an athlete, you do learn what exactly that means to be able to find a way to be able to stand back up and say, I'm going to continue to compete as we go forward. At the University of Minnesota, and again at most institutions, we have a lot of programs that we have in place that really supplement their experience on the fields that speak to leadership specifically. So we want them to participate in community service opportunities. We are intentional about trying to connect them with internships and career placement so that they can translate and use those experiences going forward. It used to be they would say, hey, make sure you put the fact that you were a student athlete on your resume. And statistics will show you that really speaks to employers. But now we can actually market them as talent to our communities before they even graduate. They're interested in what our athletes can bring to the community. So we want to make sure we're doing that early on in their career. One of our best and brightest student athletes came to us with an idea to develop a pro day. Well, we all know most of our student athletes go pro in something other than sport, so we created our own version of a pro day. And this isn't where scouts are coming in to watch them compete, but we bring in over 65 employers that just do a career fair specifically with our student athletes. Each and every year our freshmen go, even though they're not looking for careers, as they try and we want them to learn what it's all about, learn how to talk to recruiters, and maybe find something that might be interesting to them. So we bring them back each and every year, and they get internships and certainly job placement opportunities from that. It's important that we do resume development, interview skills, professional etiquette, all those things that they are also learning on campus, but we try and help them to incorporate the skills they've learned through their competitive experiences into that resume and into those interviews so they can help sell what they may be able to bring to a particular company. We talk about financial management, and as of late, we have started a program called Women Invested in Leadership and Learning. So this is directed specifically at our young female athletes. It's a partnership we have with a local Minnesota company, the Schwann Food Company, who also has a similar program, and we actually have their leaders, their female leaders that come in and train our female student athletes on what it means to be a leader. Really helps them to identify their personal brand and to help prepare them for the next step. All of us here in Minnesota celebrate our All-American, Rachel Bannum, the 4th national championship out of the last 5 years that our Gopher women's hockey team won. And we look forward to another championship, hopefully this summer, from the Minnesota Lynx. But amongst all this success we see in women's sports, what really stays with me is the thousands, literally thousands of young girls that have been at our games and stood in line for long periods of time just to meet our athletes, to sign autographs, because they think they can have that same opportunity, and we see what that'll mean to them. We want to ensure that their dreams and their passions continue to grow, and we want them to have those same opportunities and see that they can extend well beyond the courts, the field, the pool, or the ice. So as you leave here tonight and think about what it means to be supportive of women and young women in sports, I want you to think about what it means to remember the past and celebrate what we have today, but also be committed to helping everyone make sure that those opportunities continue to exist for our young women in the future. So I know we've got some Gopher fans maybe in the room, a few. So I still want to talk and celebrate about our young women, but I want to share with you some of the great things that are happening on our campus each and every day in Gopher athletics. Really proud to be able to share with you some of the accomplishments they have in the classroom and certainly some of the competitive things as well. I'm more than happy to answer your questions about Gopher athletics and women's in sports when we finish up here about any topic. But I will just say this to start. Certainly the past 8 months have been more challenging than we would have chosen. Our student athletes, our fans, and the state of Minnesota deserve better than what we've been able to show in several areas, again, over that period of time. But that said, I don't want that to overshadow the great stories that come out of there each and every day. By the time I left the office at noon, I've heard today that one student athlete already got offered a job, a graduating senior. We have a young man that had been struggling in organic chemistry that came in and full of excitement because they passed their test, and certainly somebody, I'm sure, that had a great day at practice. We have thousands of those stories that happen in a given year, and we certainly don't want some of the issues that we've had to overshadow that, so a lot of great stories that have come out. We are certainly working towards building greatness. We have, on the academic side, just an incredible group of young men and women. The APR, which is an NCAA measure that measures your academic progress rate, retention, and eligibility. Minnesota has the highest academic progress rate for a public FBS institution in the country, and 5th overall. So we had a few private schools that beat us out, but 5th overall in the country, and we couldn't be more excited than that. We have over 300 academic all Big Ten athletes over the past year, and that means that they were carrying over a 3.0 grade point average. And for the second consecutive semester, we've had over a 3.2 cumulative GPA for all 725 student athletes. So we couldn't be more proud about what they're achieving in the classroom. The Big Ten also awards one postgraduate scholarship that recognizes academic, athletic, and leadership activities, one male and one female across all 14 institutions. For the last 2 years, that award has gone to female athletes at the University of Minnesota. Last year's winner was Jessica Plant, who was one of our women's swimmers. And this year's winner, just the All-American kid, is Lindsay Mabel, and she's one of our women's gymnasts. So we're really proud of that. As many of you may have heard, we're building a few new buildings out in back of Bierman. And we call that new building the Athletes Village. What that's going to entail, we're going to have some practice facilities for both our men's and women's basketball teams. We'll have an indoor practice facility that will be used by football as well as our other sports. We have one indoor facility at the moment that's shared by all 25, and it snows a little bit here in Minnesota, I've learned. So that place is packed from 6 in the morning till 10 at night, and so we're just running out of space, so that indoor space. What city? It'll be in Minneapolis on the Twin Cities campus and right behind the athletic building that currently exists. So we're going to build it in the same spot. So what you're looking at in this picture right here is just a renovated front entrance that already exists to Bierman on 15th Avenue right there. So those buildings are going to be attached to our current sort of operational structure. The one that is most exciting for me is the Land O'Lakes Excellence Center. There's going to be 3 components to that. The ground floor is going to be a nutrition center, so we can really focus on the importance of nutrition and how that impacts performance. We're going to have 2 floors of the Excellence Center that are dedicated to academic space. We have tremendous support programs, and as I've told you, they're doing great in the classroom. But if you were at Bierman right now at about 20 to 8, you're going to see student athletes and their tutors sitting in every nook and cranny on the hallway. So we've just really run out of space. So we're just need a little bit of additional square footage. And then the top floor is going to be really its first of its kind dedicated space for leadership development. And it's not about the building, it's about what's going to happen in that space. So we're just thrilled that we're able to do that. So we started construction, broke ground this fall, it's scheduled to have all 3 of those buildings opened in January of 2018. So they'll be able to move in and really start to use those things. That's a great question. He asked, what is the cost of that facility? So the facility is a $166 million project. It'll be completely funded through private sources, not through any state money or university funds. At this point, we've raised about half of that, so we're just a little bit north of $80 million. We still have a little bit of ways to go, but we're excited about the opportunities that exist to complete that project. The other component of this is that building in the back there. You can see it's sort of white on one side and the brick on the other. Sits on what is now the Bierman track. So our track has been inoperational for a competitive standpoint for about, for over a decade now, since the last time we've hosted a Big Ten meet. So the fact that the buildings are going on the track means that we get to build a new facility, and it'll be the best competitive facility both of those programs, the men's and women's teams, have had in quite some time. So we're still looking to determine exactly what the site location is going to be for that, but that'll also come online in the next couple years. So that's going to be a great need and great asset for our student athletes. Our competitive success, and I think this might surprise you all, but there is what's called the Learfield Directors Cup, which measures overall competitive success across all sport programs. Right now, Minnesota is ranked 3rd in the country in the Learfield Directors Cup standings. So that is based on the success of all of your sports, and we are currently 3rd overall in the country. Now, I know a lot of us are still disappointed maybe about some of the success of our higher profile teams, and we want to see those teams get better and achieve at a higher level as well. But overall, the program is really doing quite well across the board. Our women's soccer team made the NCAA tournament this year in the second round. Men's and women's cross country were both finished in the top 25 and went to the national meet. Their first bowl victory in football since 2004 at the Quick Lane Bowl this past January in Detroit, or December in Detroit. Volleyball, I think they did something pretty special this year. I can't remember what that was, but they made a trip to the Final Four, and there's just more to come. We've got some local young women playing for that team as well. So if any of you know the Tapp family, and Hannah and Paige are just incredible young women and incredible athletes, and so they really were great leaders on that team. We have had 3 Big Ten regular season championships so far this year: women's volleyball, men's hockey, and women's gymnastics. Swimming and diving had individuals that were named All-Americans, as did wrestling, had 2 just a couple weeks ago. Softball, currently ranked in the top 25 in the country. Baseball just beat Missouri State this past weekend, who was ranked in the top 25, so the men are doing extremely well. And women's hockey won the national championship. They're 6th overall, and they're 4th out of the last 5 years. I still think the girls are singing and dancing, because that's what they did the whole way home from New Hampshire. Definitely one of the highlights since I've been here, to see the excitement that they bring each and every day from a competitive standpoint. I do want to leave a little bit of time so we can talk a little bit more Gopher athletics and certainly about Title IX. But in closing, I just want to thank you for letting me share my passion for women's sports, and remind you again that it's really about building future leaders. It's not about the wins and losses. It's not about which sport they choose to play. It's about their overall development. And I think it's really important that we continue to support them when they're just starting out, give them an opportunity to see how it might impact their future choices. So for the fans in the room, I thank you for your continued support. And with that, I'm happy to answer any question that you might have. We got a microphone in the back here. And don't feel like you need to go easy on me. I'll answer any question you got.
Okay. How many women athletic directors are there in the Big Ten and in Division I schools? Like how many out of how many?
Well, there are 14 schools in the Big Ten, and there's one female AD, Sandy Barber at Penn State.
And how about in Division I?
Well, I'm going to break it down in FBS because I don't know if I can give you the Division I statistic. FBS, which is the 5 major conferences in the 65 schools. So there's 65 FBS schools, and there are 2. Debbie Yao, who is at NC State. So 2 of 65 at the FBS level. Now there's at Division I, off the top of my head, I think there's about 9 or 10 across all of Division I. Drake, Eastern Michigan, one of the Texas schools. So there's more across Division I, but not statistically, certainly not that many.
Would that be maybe because they just, like they told me at my alma mater, there's no tenured women professors in political science because there just aren't any people who are qualified?
Well, I don't know if I'd be able to speak for those that make hiring decisions. But whether it's in sport or in any other industry, gender shouldn't be a reason why you should or should not be qualified for a job. They should be evaluating your skills and what vision you can bring to a particular position. I do think it'd be great at some point in time for our young women to look up and say, hey, that's something that I can do one day. And sometimes you need to see people that look like you. And I think that's true whenever you're talking about any diverse group. That opportunity sometimes comes from the belief that you can do that. So hopefully those opportunities will continue to grow down the road.
For those of us interested in wins and losses, I say thank you to the women's program at the U this year.
Yeah.
But I have a couple questions. Comparing male athletes with female on the academic side, can you comment on that?
Yeah, overall we've had a lot of success at Minnesota across the board in both our men's and women's programs in the classroom. Some of our best and brightest are in both genders. I do think there's still a belief on the men's side in some sports that they're going to go pro after college. And there's certainly men that go pro and women that go pro. But you can ask some of our, for example, you could ask some football student athletes who've never gotten playing time, who still think that they may have a chance to play in the pros. And so their capabilities, I think, are always the same. But sometimes, at least that first year, you've got to make sure that you're preaching the right things and talking to them about why they're here. And our number one priority is that after keeping them safe and healthy, is that they earn a degree. Our graduation rates over the last 5 years have just soared. In athletics, there's been a renewed commitment across the board. I think under Coach Kill and certainly under Coach Clay's, you can see that change. We've held them accountable for the reason that they come to Minnesota, and again, that's to earn a degree.
Which sport has the best GPA?
This past semester, women's golf had the highest GPA on the women's side, and on, let me see if I don't speak out of turn here, on the men's side, actually on the men's side this year, I think it was men's golf. So we've got some bright golfers. But by highest, we have so many teams that I think women's golf had a 3.48. Women's basketball, for those that were at the banquet last night, I think they had a 3.24. So they're quite high across the board.
One other question. You comment on community service.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a requirement for a scholarship athlete? And if so, what do you mean by community service?
Many of our teams, from a department perspective, we don't have a set number of hours that's a requirement, but almost every single team that we have requires that they do a certain amount. Oftentimes they'll do that as a team. We have a program called the Magic Program, and so student athletes can also volunteer their time. Last year we did over 15,000 hours of community service in 1 year. There are some things we do department-wide. We have a Welcome Back St. Jude's picnic that we do for children that are battling illness in the fall. When we bring them on campus. But our students every day, we have a bus. The Magic Bus actually goes out into the community, and they're at grade schools, whether that's reading to young kids or talking to them about healthy living, those different types of things. So that's a really important piece of what we do.
When can the track program look forward to knowing where their facility is going to be? Any progress?
There's been lots of progress. They're actually in the design portion of building the track. So the first steps they take when they actually have to have an architect looked at what that facility is going to look at. In terms of the location, there's a few location possibilities. It's been determined it'll be on the West Bank. So it'll be near classes and near Bierman, where the rest of their support services are going to be. I don't have an exact timeline for when they'll choose. I can tell you that one of the reasons we're not publicly talking about those options is because not all the land, the university doesn't own all the land that the track may be on, even on our own campus. So nothing like saying you need to buy something and the price going up. So, but we think that'll be resolved here shortly, and they'll be able to create a plan for construction.
You talked about the hockey team, women's.
Yes.
What can the university do, if anything, to have the games on TV, especially the championship game?
Yeah. I appreciate the question, because that is a source of angst for all of us. Did anybody see the replayed game on CBS yesterday? So that was a step forward, although not a great step for us in Minnesota. But I will tell you what that meant is all of us, most of us that work there, we all got texts from our friends saying, "Hey, congratulations, saw the team on TV yesterday," not really realizing, because they don't track ice hockey necessarily, that was a week gone by. So it was really a good step that it was on TV at all from a national perspective. It was on CBS, so it wasn't on, your third buried cable station. So people across the country did have an opportunity to watch women's hockey. The reason it's not on is the NCAA has a really long-term contract with CBS Sports that sort of blanketly covers a lot of Olympic sports, and women's ice hockey is one of them. So at this point, unless they break their contract, which I believe runs through 2022 or some version of that, they cannot find somebody to take the rights that'll allow CBS to continue to stream, because CBS won't let go of that streaming. So I think continuing to reach out to the NCAA, Governor Dayton spoke directly with the Vice President of Championships at the NCAA, sharing his concerns. So I think we've been heard. It's just a matter of what action steps they might be able to take in terms of an existing contract that they have with CBS Sports. It does not, unfortunately.
Couple questions and a comment, Beth. I think about a year ago, I think the university was being investigated as far as Title IX, as far as being in compliance. Mm-hmm. Has that been resolved, or is it still ongoing?
Yeah, it's still ongoing. So two things happened, really. We commissioned on our own an external review. So we actually hired somebody on our own initiative to come in and really help us evaluate what we were doing well and where we might be falling short with Title IX. There's not a checklist that says, hey, if you do these 10 things, particularly in those benefit areas, those 11 benefit areas I talked about, that says you're in compliance. So it's a really complex world we live in right now for many reasons. So it's really good, I think, to have an outside set of eyes say, hey, you're doing well in this area, but you really need to make some improvements here. So we had just brought someone in, and we did get that report back, and we have already started to implement some of the things we identified and that we looked at through that report. We also were contacted by the Office of Civil Rights. It was a year ago, December, saying that they were going to do a review of our total program. So they've been on campus 3 times now. I think they're going to come back a 4th, and they ask for a lot of different information. Through the process, there's they do have a checklist of information they collect. So we've not gotten any feedback about what they think we're doing well or where they think we need improvement. But we're certainly open to those types of reviews, and we'll be committed to making any changes that they request.
Okay. Second question on the athletic village.
Mhm.
You said it's going to cost about 166 million, and you got about half of that.
Yes.
How's the rest of it going to be funded? I know you're trying to get more people, donations, obviously, but
Right.
if they don't come about,
Well, we're fairly confident that we're going to work hard enough, and we've got some great relationships that we'll be able to meet our $166 million goal. But if not, it's similar to buying a house. So we'll take a loan essentially, and we'll debt payments again that'll be paid for out of the operational dollars that the university athletic department has. So strictly athletics. Overall, this might be interesting too. Our current budget in athletics is $107 million. We have revenues that come from TV contracts, the Big Ten. That's about 30% of that 107 that come in through the Big Ten, ESPN, CBS. We also receive money from the NCAA basketball tournaments that's distributed equally. About 30% or so of our revenue comes from ticket sales. Primarily from our three sports of football, men's basketball, and hockey, although we do generate some revenue in some of our other Olympic sports as well. So that's about another 30%. And then we also have very kind, generous donations from the annual fund, as well as sponsorship. We get about $10 million in sponsorship dollars a year through an agreement we have with Learfield Sports and some other areas. So about $107 million budget.
and then one comment I had up there, you talked about the football team winning their first bowl game since 2004.
Mhm.
Well, the only reason they were in a bowl game, I know they didn't have the greatest year, was because of their academic achievements. So I think that's something that should be
That's
should
right.
be very proud of.
Yeah, you know, we took a lot of heat about going to that bowl game, and the truth is that I think most of us, including the coaching staff, would agree that the bowl system on selections needs some work. But we didn't create that selection, so the fact that there was a spot open. And we were entitled to it was completely based on the academic achievement of our young men. So to tell them that their number one priority is graduation and academics, and then when they achieved there at a higher level than they did competitively, and then turn around and say, you can't participate because you got there academically and not competitively, philosophically didn't send the right message. And so we were committed to making sure that happened because they got there for the right reasons, and it was a great experience for them. And we throw in with everybody who says the bowl system needs a little bit of tweaking. We don't disagree, but we mean what we say when we say academics is the number one priority. So when we had an opportunity to reward them for that, we thought it was really important.
A couple, just kind of adding to that too, and I would say that my perception as a season football ticket holder, and I'm going to all the bowl games the last quite a few years, you run into all your players, and I'm kind of seeing that Jerry Kill and hopefully Tracy Clay is the recruits that he's getting. School is more a part of part of that recruitment process. It just seems like the student athlete,
Mm-hmm.
they're thinking about the student part of it too. And every time I run into the kids at the bowl games, it's just amazing how nice they are and how willing they are to come up and talk to the fans, that kind of thing. But would you touch a little bit on your potential for being the athletic director? I know that now they're getting a committee after a lot of months. Now they're putting a committee together. I kind of don't understand why that didn't happen a long time ago. And then the other thing, I guess. There was one, as a season ticket holder too, and making money on the football team, basketball team. It just seems like the basketball crowd, I don't see as many people filling up the stadium. I know we're charging more for our football seats are going up, $150, $300 per seat. Next year, $500 per seat before I buy the tickets too. Do you see numbers going down at all for our attendance?
That's
going forward?
great questions. And so you guys let me warm up. I had 15 minutes of questions that were easy to get to this one. Let me see if I can tick those off. In terms of the athletic director search, I have the utmost confidence in President Kaler and our Board of Regents, and they are committed to making sure that our athletic department stands for the right things and is going to pursue excellence in the classroom and competitively on the field. So they've started the search process now, and I think there's a lot of reasons that had to be delayed. We certainly were going through an external review. Again, wanted to ensure that we were doing things the right way, wanted to ensure that the search process was effective. So they've started that process now, and I'm certainly confident they're going to find the right leader for the position. In terms of our ticket sales, in football in particular, let me start with that one first. Scholarship seating is something that's really benefited our student athletes. I think we, as most of you know, we actually pay our scholarship dollars back to the university. So that's not, there's no discount there. We pay the full price of scholarships back to the university, and that scholarship seating has really allowed us to do that. It certainly, we certainly understand the impact those price increases can have. We did a lot of research across the country to really try and compare and see if we were in the right space, and have really tried to work with each and every one of our ticket holders to make sure we can find them the right spot. If that hasn't happened, let me know, because we'll make sure somebody calls you and speaks to you individually. Right now, we're about 4 weeks out from the deadline in terms of season ticket renewals, and we're trending within 2% of where we were at last year at this time, so we don't anticipate any challenges there. And I think a lot of that is really reflective of the culture that Coach Kill and now Coach Clays has instilled in that program. I think people can visibly see a change in how they have approached things. They certainly are seeing some success on the field, but they are great young men. They're achieving great things, again, in the classroom, and they're great community members, so I think we see that. We're always concerned about how we are going to continue to make sure that the experience for our fans is excellent. And part of that is certainly winning. We're not going to be afraid to say we want to win. We want to be competitive. We want to compete in the Big Ten and nationally. And there are years where we fall short. And certainly that was true in basketball this year, and I think we saw that in the barn. We're hopeful with the recruiting class and some of our young student athletes that's going to be more productive, but we continue to look at that, and then when we fall short, we certainly are going to evaluate that, but we're committed to making sure that we make everybody proud, whether that is because you come in and you buy a ticket and you watch the game, you watch on TV, or whether it's just in a conversation you might have with your neighbors. So does that answer your question?
You are doing an absolutely excellent job as interim AD.
Thank you.
I know that you also have your hat in the ring for the permanent position. So what would be the top 3 things in your estimation that a good AD would do, given the opportunity to get the job?
Yeah, I got to prep for an interview question here, I think. Well, let's talk about ADs in general, and certainly not just the Minnesota job. But I think first and foremost, when you are the leader of any organization, and certainly one that encompasses young men and women at such an impressionable age, you have to create an environment that operates with integrity in everything you do. So your values, you have to be a model. You have to live those values so they can see them each and every day, and those values need to be shared values of the institution and shared values of the state of Minnesota, or whatever institution or state you're working in. So I think that's certainly number one. Number two, I think it's you have to have a vision for what is most important, and I think at the University of Minnesota that's achieving excellence in everything that you do, and that means setting public and very transparent goals about where you're trying to get to, and that is on the field and in the classroom. And I think you need to set those expectations, manage those expectations, and certainly hold them accountable. The third, and I think this is certainly true at all institutions and maybe more at Minnesota than others, but we're an integral component of the University of Minnesota and the state of Minnesota. We have a responsibility that extends well beyond one particular field. And with that responsibility, I think you have to look at how you operate, what your role is on campus, what your role is for the state of Minnesota. And we think that is to bring pride, to help showcase the great research that's being done, in our classrooms, in our labs, in our hospitals, all of those different things. And I think it's really important that you have a plan that's going to speak to what that looks like.
I do have another comment, and it kind of follows a little bit what Jim had to say. And all those who are football fans, one of the things I really love is that I know Coach Kill did it. Now Coach Clays is doing it, that practices are open to the public. And that's been really neat. It's you're right up there next to the players. And I was up there last week, and the players, there's little kids there, and they're high-fiving it with the players and things like that there. So that has been really neat. So I would just recommend anybody who's interested in Golden Gopher football to get to one of those open practices. It's really super.
Yeah. Thank you.
Title IX question. When at the beginning of your presentation, you said Title IX is like with the athletes, but not with the coaching staff. Or can you help me understand the current lawsuit with the University of Minnesota Duluth with the hockey coach that they're saying it's a Title IX suit?
I probably can't speak to that in detail if it's and I would have only read what was in the paper. But typically employment lawsuits, and Chancellor might be able to help me out here, but I think usually that's Title VII, not Title IX. I don't know if that's true at Duluth or not, if it's Title VII or Title IX, but typically when it involves an employee, it falls under Title VII and not Title IX.
So is Duluth incorrect then? They keep talking about Title IX.
Yeah, you know what? Again, I'd be happy to look into it and see if we can find some clarification in terms of Title IX. But I'm not as familiar with what is going on at the Duluth campus, other than what we read in the paper.
One more?
Every once in a while I read about player agitation or some agitation for players who think they need to unionize or agitation to pay the players. Do you have any of that agitation at Minnesota?
You know, that's a great question. The landscape in college athletics, particularly Division I athletics, is more unique and maybe tumultuous right now than it's been in decades with those types of lawsuits, pay for play, unionization, name, image, likeness, cost of attendance, which is another one that's out there. So I would certainly believe that if asked, that we would probably have some student athletes that feel that way. At the University of Minnesota, and certainly I think I can speak for the Big Ten, but we believe in the collegiate model. We understand the concerns. And when you have rising salaries for coaches and TV contracts and all of those other things, it begs the question. It's certainly hard to defend at times. But we believe that there is value in the scholarship that we provide to our student athletes. We believe there's value in the opportunity that they receive to be a part of athletics. And I think if pay for play became a real thing, I think you'd see a lot of institutions, and again, a question probably for Dr. Kaler to answer, but I think you'd see a lot of institutions that look for a different type of model.
That's it? All right, thank you. Going to call our door prize. Let's pull a flip.
Pick a name.
Flip.
Dean. You win.